Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Great to see all of you here. I'd like to invite our panelists to come up and join me for this session. So come on up and sit down, please, everybody. Luna, Alejandra, thank you. And Jennifer, our rapporteur. That's great. So in keeping with, as John said, the desire to make this a workshop and be somewhat informal, I really do want to have a conversation. I think a couple of our panelists have brief presentations, which I think will be useful to understand their perspective. But then I really do want to make this more of a discussion. This panel is, as it says, about translating climate statements into action and how to bring water into that conversation as a cross-cutting solution. As John said, I direct the Global Water Program at World Resources Institute. Those of you that don't know us, we're a global environment and international development think tank. We work on thematic areas that are environment-related: food, water, ocean, energy, climate, and we have a very large sustainable cities center as well. We work in 50 countries around the world. And I guess what I want to reflect on as I kick off our panel this morning is the obvious as we head into COP25, that we are living in truly urgent times. As the 1.5 degree report has helped to point out, there are very serious issues that we face today. There are serious threats and real choices to be made. And water, as all of us in this room know, lies at the center of that, the water and climate nexus. We know that in many places, effects on fresh water related to climate change are going to be first and worst. But as Danny has well pointed out, we continue to speak really a different language. And I observe this and experience it in my own organization. So WRI's climate program is very active in the lead up to COP on NDC enhancements and so on. And I've had, even within WRI, to kind of make the case for how important water is. In fact, we put together a fact sheet with my climate colleagues just to point out to those that they're working with within countries in negotiations on the Paris Agreement about how central water can be in that discussion, both mitigation and adaptation. And that's something I want to get to with the panel, is what are the things that we can be doing that relate to both, in fact, and that's often, I think, not appreciated. So one of the challenges that water has is because it is so cross-cutting, because it is everywhere, it is also nowhere in some ways. And another place that we're experiencing this right now is WRI acts as the co-managing partner with the Global Center for Adaptation in the Netherlands for a new initiative on the Global Commission on Adaptation, really to try to raise ambition and awareness around climate adaptation issues. And in the early discussions around this Global Commission, we made the decision that because water is so cross-cutting and other systems issues, whether that's sustainable cities, sustainable infrastructure, food security and agriculture and so on, that it should be captured across those. And as we came to begin to develop a report, a flagship report that will be released this September at the UN General Assemblies or the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit, we also realized that, in fact, we also needed a separate chapter about water and how important it is. So I think this is one of the inherent challenges with water. It is both cross-cutting, and we need to be understanding how that is true across all of those systems issues. And there are things as sort of threshold questions about water that we should be thinking about with respect to NDCs, with respect to climate change. And so that's part of what I really wanted to get at in this discussion today. I'm going to introduce each panelist, but ask them to introduce themselves a bit more and their background. And I think one of the panelists that was supposed to be here today that is on your list, Emmanuel Pignol, was not able to attend. She, unfortunately, is ill today, I'm sorry, from C40, but we'll address some city issues as well anyway. So with that brief introduction, let me turn, Luna, to you and ask you, Luna Bharati from International Water Management Institute, to introduce yourself a bit and make some introductory comments.
Thanks a lot, Betsy. So I'm Dr. Luna Bharati. I work for the International Water Management Institute, IWMI, and I'm a principal scientist, and I'm actually based here at the Center for Development Research under the University of Bonn. And I've been working on, identifying climate change impacts on water, on river basins, on countries, etc. And I'd be sharing some of my own work as well as what IWMI is doing in this sector. And what, just an introductory statement. I see a lot of familiar faces here. And, for all of us, it's very clear. Water is cross-cutting. It's the medium for which climate change impacts will be felt, and also a medium where adaptation and mitigation efforts, have to be led. However, for the climate community, I find it's still seen as a sectoral, issue. Water is a sector, just like agriculture. And so to try to bring water to the forefront is still an ongoing effort. And yeah.
Thanks, Luna. Alejandra.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Dr. Alejandra Stehr. I'm from the University of Concepcion. I'm the director of the Environmental Research Center of the university. And I work mainly, my research area is related to water availability and how climate change and also all global changes. For example, land use change is a big use in Chile. And if you go, for example, to the webpage of COP25, you don't see water as an highly important aspect. But I'm also participating as one of the 9 scientific that are involved in the scientific part of COP25 in Chile. That is a very big step for us in Chile, because politics don't speak with scientifics. So that is a very important step that the government is able to hear for us and take our opinions for the establishment of the NDCs and further them in other years for the establishment of adaptations plans and mitigation plans for the country. I think that is a very important thing, and I think that water is a cross-using theme, and he has not been so seen. And the problem is that maybe we in Chile, we live in the big cities, we have water, but the problem of water availability is in the rural area, where I will show you then some pictures about the problem that they have. Maybe it's not a big part of the population of Chile, but are the more vulnerable one.
Thibaud, please introduce yourself.
Is this? Yes, it's working. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Thibaud Voïta. I'm the head of knowledge products at the NDC Partnership. So I myself, I do not come from the water sector, but from the climate sector. And I've been in the climate sector for less than a year, since I come mostly from energy, and more specifically energy efficiency, which is, by the way, also a cross-cutting issue, very much ignored by other topics and by the general climate arena, though there's also lots of benefits to it. And I worked on the energy efficiency field for years, and recently the water and energy and also food nexus became more and more important. So there's hope in these different areas working together and coming with cross-cutting solutions. And I look forward for the discussion.
Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Jennifer Fernando. I'm a program officer at the French Water Partnership. So the French Water Partnership is a multi-stakeholders platform, and our main goal is to push water at the international level in order to be a potential subject in the international agenda. And of course, one of the main goals is also to exchange with the international players in the field of water, and also to promote solution, because and we will probably see that the field of water has many solutions, and we have to promote them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Now, I'm tempted, given the time, to go right into some questions, but Thibaud, did you have a quick couple of slides in a presentation that you would like to make, or would you prefer to just speak to those points?
Am I the only one to have a
Alejandra? Or? Okay. I
can speak.
Very good. I think given our group, if it's all right with both of you, Alejandra and Thibaud, let's just go ahead and have a conversation. If that's, is that okay?
Should I go first?
You want to present? All right. Let me just ask you then to keep it very brief, if you don't mind, on NDCP.
I thought you meant that I would just speak and not make my presentation.
That's what I did mean. Okay, good.
Okay, so
Why don't you give us a bit more background quickly on the NDC partnership?
Okay, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. The NDC partnership was established during the COP22 in Marrakesh, and it's a coalition of countries and different institutions, including the Global Water Partnership, that aim at working on this nexus between SDGs and climate change. So we are really between sustainable development and climate change, with all the benefits that these policies will bring. We have a very strong focus. One of our main way of working is that we are very much country-driven. So we work only upon requests from the countries. And the way that we work usually is that we have a request for support coming from countries which identify specific areas or topics that they want us to work with, and then we work along with our partners to support them in establishing implementation plans for their NDCs. We have, I don't know how many members, because it's changing every week, so it's very difficult to remember and to keep updated. But I would say we're active. We have a bit less than 100 country members, I think, and we're active in around 50 of them. We have also a number of partner institutions, as I just mentioned. We're hosted by WRI in Washington, D.C., and by the UNFCCC, very close from here, where I'm myself I'm located. And we have we currently we have our co-chairs. We have a steering committee with. I'm skipping the presentation in order to go more quickly. So we have a steering committee which is co-chaired by Costa Rica and the Netherlands. To quickly go into our work on water, I mean, we have came to this conclusion that on one hand, water is really identified by most of our countries as one of the most daunting tasks when it comes to adaptation. It's really a challenge that relates to many adaptation issues. But then, on the other hand, it's very often ignored and sometimes not even included in the NDCs, which is something we're trying to work with. So, for instance, out of these requests that I mentioned from our different country members, around something like 5% of these requests are only focused on water, which is very little. Of course, you could argue that agriculture and other issues also have some water components, but still, it's very minor. So we are doing our best to work with the countries to try to address these issues. We've been working, for instance, with Namibia so that they would include water in their NDC. We're also working with a number right now of sub-Saharan countries on a peer-to-peer exchange for them to know how to manage drought issues from these countries in the Sahel region. And we have also several case studies from our countries that we see as pretty successful. So I was mentioning in my presentation, San Pedro Sula in Honduras, where the water, it's a more than 1 million inhabitant city, the second biggest in the country, where the water comes mostly from a huge forest nearby, and that forest was threatened by illegal logging, by climate change side effects, and the city really has put together some monitoring measures in order empowering every inhabitant to work on the protection of the forest, and that has allowed this city to now have sustainable water provision, and it's really one of the very few cities in Central America to have such a system. So maybe I will stop now, and hopefully I will have the time to speak further during the conversation or maybe during the break.
Thank you, Thibaud. I think those are really interesting examples. And those of you that are not familiar, I think most are, with the NDC Partnership. I think it's a great opportunity because you have so many countries that are engaged because of the peer-to-peer learning and exchange opportunities, not to speak of the fact that these are the focal points that are actually involved in actually implementing NDCs. So I think it's very exciting. Let me ask a follow-up question, if I might. What is your sense? Is it that people do not know how to begin to address water, that they don't see it, as you were pointing out in some of the cross-sectoral issues, or they don't know what a set of sort of, smart actions might be to even include in the NDCs? Where do you think the problem is most acute?
It's a bit difficult for me to answer because I'm still pretty young in the organization, so I haven't seen really the process that led to leaving water aside. But I would say that there are many reasons for that. Water being too big of an issue is definitely one. I think also you have the question of who's in charge of what. Maybe sometimes water is being managed in a specific division, and that all focal points of the people we're working with, unfortunately, do not work with this division. I don't know. It's just a hypothesis, and or sometimes it's maybe not seen as a policy priorities for a number of reasons, and. One important thing actually is mainstreaming all these issues, not only water but also energy, for instance, or agriculture, could sometimes allow to come out with NDCs that are much more ambitious than what it seemed at the beginning. And this is extremely important at a time where we are talking about the NDC update and revision that is to be completed by the end of next year.
Thank you. And this is a question I'm going to put back to the audience in a moment, because I think some of you also have had some experience in how do you engage and how can we start to break through. Alejandra, let me maybe turn to you with a similar question. How, given your own experience, what you see happening in Chile, how do you build the political will? Where do you find the leverage points for including water and getting more ambition around that and understanding the cross-cutting nature of it in NDCs?
I think the opportunity that we have now with the scientific committee is very important, and also that we are we have the presidency of the COP25, because that is something that has raised the climate change topic in Chile for all people, but because maybe we as scientific politics in the Congress, and they speak about climate change since many years, but the normal people that live in the cities, that live in the country, they suffer only the consequences. They don't know what is climate change. I'm suffering only the consequences. We have flooding, droughts in Chile, so drought, and that is something that is happening. And I think it is important also to have the commitment of local governments. All the what we see in Chile, there are national adaptation plans, but they are not made with the local governments, and all the implementation should be done by the local governments. That's why, for example, I live in Concepcion, that is the Biobío region. There are 34 municipalities, and we have signed an agreement to collaborate between public sector, with the municipalities, with the universities in the region, and also with the private sector in terms of adaptation to climate change, because many times we speak only about mitigation. We think climate change, and we think to reducing CO2 and so on. But what we have to face now in this stage is adaptation. We have to work in mitigation because that is for the future. But now we have to work in adaptation strategies, and that is very important. That's why we have signed this agreement of cooperation. It's called the Climate Change Observatory, where the idea is to give support to the local governments, and also to sometimes a local municipality is doing very good things, but the municipality that is next to this don't know. And to have these all experiences together to see which one are good, which one are not working, so they don't make it again. So that is an idea. And we have also another example of working together, another municipality with the private sector, with the forest industry, and with the local community, building up a system of to provide water to a rural community, because as we have a very big deficit in water availability, rural communities half of the rural communities are now water supply is given by water trucks, and these take other problems of health and gender inequality, because women are that they once they go for the water, they go then they go not to school, and so we see that combined efforts can have good results. I think that is the most important one, that we have to work together and with the local governments.
Thanks, Alejandra. Luna, what's your perspective on this question? And maybe also, if I might add, the connection between adaptation and mitigation, and how are leaders and decision makers understanding that connection, and is that a fruitful place for us to get more attention to the water question?
Yeah. Okay, so before I begin, I just want to, would that be okay if I say a few words about IWMI? Or, yeah, okay, so the International Water Management Institute, basically, we're a research organization. We're part of the CGIAR. So we're a bunch of scientists, a couple of hundred scientists, and we're based mainly in Africa and Asia. And so that really adds value to the work we're doing, because we're engaging with national level governments on a day-to-day basis. And we work at different levels, national level, regional level, national level, as well as, the local level, and in policies as well as, practices. And now linking up to your question, I personally find, through IWMI, I've personally also been involved in helping governments include climate change in their strategies. So for example, the Department of Irrigation, Nepal, is going through the process of developing river basin master plans or irrigation master plans. And we help them incorporate climate change and water adaptation aspects into, climate change risks on water into that. And also for the National Planning Commission to develop their climate change strategy. However, from my experience, what I see is there's a big gap. I mean, so far, adaptation, water, climate change, it's basically still limited in plans and strategies and policies, but there's a big gap in translating those into local actions. I'll give you an example. Also from Nepal, we conducted a household survey with over 5,000 people, asking them about their perceptions on climate change and, the impacts. And over 50% reported that they are experiencing, impacts of climate change, which ranged from untimely rain, hailstorms, droughts, so all very water related. And then the other questions were, so what did you do about it? 80% said do nothing. That was the first answer. Only 3% reported that they received some services, to cope with climate change impacts. So I find that's the big gap. We're all so focused on all writing these policies and strategies and action plans that, we're not putting enough effort into translating those into local actions. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We observe this a lot too. Just take a moment to say that I think many of us in the room have seen, of course, national adaptation plans are important. Of course, what's in NDCs are very, very important. But there are often these, sort of parallel planning processes. And at the same time, there are all kinds of investments being made at the national, at the local level, and so on. There are economic development plans that may trump those. And so I guess the question I want to put to the panel, I'm curious whoever would like to sort of jump in and answer it first, is how do we start to align those different parallel processes? And just to your point, Luna, how do we actually make it real? What are some of the specific kinds of solutions? And what are the specific ways to get decision makers, whether in the Ministry of Finance, private sector decision makers, mayors, or city officials and what have you, to start to make the right decisions that are going to be more climate adaptive, that are going to be more powerful in terms of responding to the changes we'll see with water and climate change, and on the mitigation front as well. Any thoughts on that simple question?
Well, I don't have an answer, obviously, but I have elements of answer, and I think one keyword here in the preparatory process is consultation. We've seen in all countries, in all member countries, like in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, in Peru, and in many other, to name a few, some very broad consultation processes that led to the establishment of the NDC and later to their implementation plan. And this is extremely important because not only does it improve the quality of the national programs, the national plan, but it can also create a sense of ownership at the local level that will facilitate the exchanges between the national and the local level. So I would say that as a first step, consultation is extremely important.
Implementing agencies, whether it's from the government or the private or the public sector, they have mandates. And so I think one of the main things to try to do is infuse, climate change action plans into their mandates, and which sometimes are welcome and sometimes are not. But a lot of times they're looking for that as well, because maybe the financing is dependent on that. For example, I'll give you an example. I'll talk about Nepal because that's where I've been. I was the country program head of the IWMI office in Nepal until 3 years ago. But yeah, so the Department of Soil Conservation and Watershed Management, they basically got some financing from the Asian Development Bank to build climate resilience in mountain watersheds. And so this department is a very small department. It was under the Ministry of Forestry. And this was the first time, this was back in 2012, I would say. This was the first time that they had taken on a program that mentioned climate change. So they basically didn't really know how they were, they would do that, but they wanted to, accept this program. It was a lot of money, and and so we helped them. And in the end, it's become a really, we basically of course, being a water management institute, it's not that we wanted to just push the water agenda, but we try to show that building resilience is also about, managing water properly. And in these mountain springs, first we did a vulnerability assessment to identify which are the vulnerable areas, not just from a biophysical perspective, but also from a social and institutional perspective. It's the poor, marginalized that will be impacted the most because their adaptive capacity is the least. That was one of the first things. And then that's how we selected the project areas. The second thing we did was then, help them see the forest, water, climate nexus. We conducted surveys asking communities, so where do you feel vulnerable? What are the risks that that you feel stressed about? And a lot of it was water availability. And then, managing forests to increase, for example, in these mountain communities, it was, springs are the major source of water. How do you ensure that springs continue to provide water? You manage your forests, you manage your landscapes. And, so in that way, we got a department which had previously never worked on climate change issues or water issues to incorporate that into their program. And so basically to sort of align it into their mandates, whether it's the national department agencies or a local NGO. And so that's, yeah.
Thank you, Luna. I think that's a great example. And I love the idea of, first getting them to pay attention by doing the vulnerability analysis, doing the outreach to the communities that are affected, looking at what kind of adaptive capacity they have, and then making some recommendations to them, which it sounds like they have pursued. But I think that also points to the work that has to be built sort of from the ground up, cross-sectorally, to make this happen. Alejandra, did you have a comment on this?
Yes. No, I wanted to say that I think we have to change the mind of our politicians. They have to think that we have to invest now to see long-term results, not for the next election. That is a big problem, for example, in Chile. They invest, they build buildings and so on, because that is something that they can show for the next election. But when we talk about climate change, there are big investments, but you will see the results only maybe in 30 or 40 years more. It's not something that you will be seeing now.
I think is it Mark Carney from the Bank of England who's, the tragedy of the horizon? I think that's exactly what you're talking about, and political cycles do not necessarily align there. And so that actually leads me to another question that I want to ask, and then I want to turn it over to some questions and discussion with the audience. If there were one thing that we could do in a given country, let's say, that would really spur action, and the right kind of action in terms of building resilience to climate change with respect to water, or turned around using the water sector and water investment and water management as a means of becoming more resilient to climate change, what would you suggest that is? If I'm the prime minister, president in a given country, and I ask you at a dinner party, what's the one thing I should be doing? What would you say that is? I know it's not so simple, but I'm going to make you come up with what that one thing is. Any takers? Go ahead, Lina.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, I mean, basically also reflecting on what you just said is, I mean, point the risks, I mean, to the investments that they're planning to make. And that'll, perk up their ears and that can be the government or private organizations. So basically, try to identify the risks. I mean, they're going to build a big dam, for instance, or, and so the risk on the investments. And so if you're able to do that well, then you get their attention. I mean, I would say that is one.
Okay, so point to the risks in planned infrastructure or other kinds of investments. Alejandra, do you have a thought?
Yes, I agree with that. The most easy to go to the politician is to say, no investing now will cost you so much in the future. That is what we are trying to do now. For example, I'm working also with an economist, and I have my hydrological model. He said we will have 30%, a diminish of 30% of water in this watershed. But if you go to the mayor or to the president and you say, but 30%, but if you say that will cost you $200 million, and then they say, that is important. And I think that another thing that is very important is the education to the community. Is talked about this with the young people, and because they will be the future of us, and we can talk a lot, but if they are not involved, and I think maybe the problem from our generation is that we have not seen this problem as we were at school. Now you can see the kids, they think different. I teach at the university, and I was at field work in this summer, and I was with about 15 students, and I think 13 of them were vegetarian. That was 5 years ago. That was not so, and they were asking when we will eat meat, and that you can see the changes and thinking.
Well, the Greta Thunberg factor, right? I mean, it's really been quite remarkable. I want to pick up on, before Thibaud, I just want to say two things related to what you mentioned, Alejandra, that I think are interesting. One, WRI and many other organizations have been part of an initiative that really has gotten some traction on the Global Commission on Climate and the Economy, which is really about kind of flipping around that typical discussion about it's going to cost you a lot more, though that's an important discussion, but actually what can be gained and why economies will be far more powerful in the future if they really embed taking the right kind of action and moving toward clean energy and moving toward the kinds of strategies that we know are going to be more adaptive. The other thing I would mention is that WRI, in collaboration with some Dutch partners, created a tool which we're coming out with a refreshed version of and a much expanded version of our aqueduct floods tool, which translates current flood risk and vulnerability into populations that are affected, into urban infrastructure and GDP that's at risk. We also do, based on IPCC data, future projections. And this has been an incredibly important tool. The new version we're coming out with is also look just at riverine flooding. The new version will look at coastal flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. And it's been a very powerful tool to say, well, your current risks in Pakistan might be $10 billion in GDP effects, not to speak of people right now, but that could go up by an order of magnitude by 2030 if we don't take action. And so that's been a tool that a lot of folks have used to engage with senior government officials, ministers of finance, and so on. Very, very important, I think, to do that. Thibaud, what's your thought on the one thing?
Well, if a prime minister was to ask me this, I guess I would like to have the guts to answer, well, show people, first of all, that how important it is for you, because I think this is a very good way to start with, showing really strong leadership on water issues. And then this leadership, I think, should translate into some support, into collaborative action, in order really to have this, not only empower local governments, but to have this possibility to learn from the experience, exactly what we've been discussing so far, that it can be two-side process where people learn from each other and get inspiring experiences, and where also the wealthiest or more ambitious can help the ones that have more difficulties.
Thank you all for those reflections. Now to turn to the audience. Many of you in the audience are addressing these very same questions, have some thoughts about these topics that we've just discussed. Alistair, I know you're speaking later, but I know this is very central to what you do every day at the Green Climate Fund. I'm very curious, what are thoughts from the audience on some of these questions, whether what's the one thing we should be doing differently, or questions that you would like to put to the panelists? Don't be shy. Francois.
Merci. Thanks, Betty, and thanks a lot also to the panelists. I will stand up. I'm Francois Brequet from the Global Water Partnership, and you know, I agree completely with the suggestions. But the one message which I think I would give is, I think we need to change the climate story, basically, from a threat to an opportunity. And I agree with you. Looking at gains, it's quite important, economic gains. Because we, of course, you know, you can make the world move, but the carrots can also make the world move. We've had a lot of sticks around there. And what type of opportunity? I think the opportunity of course, to also revise the way we are consuming, the way we are living. It's quite an amazing opportunity to rethink these basic things about our lives. About what type of cities we want to have. We are thinking about that already, but we can even go further. Of course, economic gains is really important, looking at cost benefits, what type of benefits this is generating, thinking differently. But also we're thinking, you know, climate has no border, and it pushes us actually on an opportunity to even dialogue much more between all of the different partners worldwide and in a region. So we'd say really change the water story, the climate story.
Good, thank you, Francois. Martin, did you have a question or a comment?
Thank you. Martin Karras, GIZ, working on water and climate change. I have a question to Thibaud. You said that 5% of the requests are water-related you get at NDCP from the countries, I understand. What is the percentage for adaptation questions? Because that might be an explanation.
I'm afraid I don't have this in mind. I will need to check. I think we're. It's difficult to tell because we have, of course, adaptation and mitigation, but also cross-cutting. And in the cross-cutting, you can have many things. But I would say that it's more or less balanced between these three, which doesn't necessarily much, but there's a kind of balance, I think. But if you're interested, I can check on our figures and tell you later if you give me your contact info.
Question back here, and I'll come back to you, Lesher. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the panelists for the introduction and all information you are sharing with us. My name is Cecilia Silva. I'm here as a representative of the government of Angola, Ministry of Environment, and as well as an adaptation committee member of the UNFCCC. Well, but I will speak as a government representative for now to say it's an important thematic idea because we all, as countries, we are somehow taking care of our water resources. Angola, for example, has around 77 watersheds among big, mid, and small watersheds, and some of those watersheds are shared with other countries. So it's a cross-border issue. And we have institutions dealing with this, but the truth is that it's not related, or there is no coordination with climate change, for example, with environment itself. So I think we have to start seeing it as an overall issue and cooperate, coordinate at national level. I agree when Alejandra said politicians doesn't work with scientists and vice versa, but we have to start working together. So bringing it to climate change, I think it's important, because if we go to countries, we have adaptation projects because of water scarcity, but we don't have policies that preserve water because of climate change. So we know something is there, we need to work on it. Maybe we don't know how to start doing it. So it's time, I think, to start thinking and providing ideas to countries on how to bring it all together at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this intervention. I really want to underscore what you said. I think it's so important that there are adaptation plans that are coming forward under NDCs or under national adaptation plans. And at the very same time, there are policies that may be in place or very often are not in place that manage sort of everyday actions. And aligning those two, I think, is one of the greatest opportunities for making real what can be in the NDCs, too, what we can be doing to address climate change. So wonderful intervention. Thank you. Lesha, I think you had a comment. Is there a... Oh, we can hear you, I think. Thank you for those comments, Lesha. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads too from the, how can we take advantage of some of these bottom-up initiatives? How can we embed them in these broader efforts like NAPs and NDCs and so on and leverage that? I want to pick up too on I was struck by the same thing about land use and forestry. And I think we at WRI, and maybe probably many in the room, are starting to see a bit of a shift around this, understanding this land and water connection as it relates to what we need to be doing to adapt to climate change. And there's a new initiative, which we and others are a part of, called Cities for Forests, which is really interesting, actually. It looks at 3 different scales of forests. It looks at green infrastructure, approaches within cities. It looks at nearby source watersheds, if you will, and also faraway forests. Think Amazon for, Sao Paulo and Rio precipitation patterns. And the beauty of that, of course, too, is that in so many communities, what they're going to be dealing with are greater extremes on the too much water, the flooding side, the too little water on the drought and reduced flows side. And maintaining, natural systems is going to be one of the most important ways of dealing with that. I'm seeing a real opportunity here, a real sea change around this. I think others in the room probably are, John and others are involved in this too. A lot of interest also from investors in starting to put more attention on this in green bonds and so on. So I think this is a really, really good opportunity. Maybe one more comment and then we should wrap up and get a few wrap-up comments from Jennifer. Please, sir.
Hi, my name is Osachanda from the African Development Bank, based in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. I think one other opportunity that we could draw on is, where opportunity permits, is to try and make these political leaders become champions of climate change. We've seen the impact and the effect of political leaders either believing or not believing in climate change. I think we've not done that well in selling messages to the leaderships so that they can come out and as champions of climate change adaptation. And the political mileage, particularly if it is tied to the local action. For instance, we have quite a number of disasters, Mozambique being a case in point. If you have the president, if you have the prime minister championing action at the local level, that makes a huge difference in saving the lives of the people on the ground. It is going to change the whole story of climate change adaptation. We'll get the resources that we need as long as we manage to get the political leadership as champions of the messages that we want to put across.
Thank you very much for that intervention, too. Jennifer, do you want to try to bring us home on some sort of key points, maybe 1 or 2 key points that you heard from this discussion?
Can you hear me? No. Oh, yeah, no, it's good. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to be short, but we will have the opportunity to speak more about this session at the end of the day. What can I see is that water is at the center, and water is under threat, but also water is a threat to life. And unfortunately, at the climate negotiation, water is not really at the center. And we speak different languages. And the idea is to try to combine the 2 fields in order to have water as an opportunity rather than to be seen as a risk. So I would like to thank you, the panelists, for all the good inputs. As I can see that there's some still gaps between the request and the NDCs, and in terms of the action in the field. but we know that water, the field of water, has many solutions, and we have to work together to try to translate those interests into the field. But at the same time, the local level has many expertise, and thanks to the scientific community, but also people in the field in taking care of lands, forests, and water. And I think we can learn more from the local community. What else? And I see also that we need also to raise awareness about climate at the local level. Indeed, people are the first in front of like the climate impact. They know that something is happening, but they don't really understand what climate change is and what kind of opportunity fight against climate change can give to the local community in terms of sustainable development. Again, I think we see today some changes, like the general public is more and more aware of climate change, and I think it's a good opportunity to involve the general public, but also the young generation. I think they will be a good voice at the different level, local, national, and international level. And I think it's very important to have them also in the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. We'll wrap up. I will just say on my part, the takeaway for me from this discussion is that there are things that we're already doing at the local level, and there are things that either are being done or could be done through sort of day-to-day policies that can and need to be linked and scaled up to make a difference at the national level and as we head into the COP for raising ambition on NDCs. So thank you very much, Thibaud, Alejandra, Luna, for this panelist. Everybody please join me in thanking them.